Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Andrea, Associate Editor of Audioholics, and I'm here with.
Rob H. This is AV Rant, the show where we answer your home theater and all things audio video questions. It's a question and answer show, although we're having lots and lots of feedback and
This week,
updates and
this week,
comments this week.
all the people that we answered, not all of them, but many of them that we answered recently have emailed us to tell us the results.
Which is awesome because I'm glad that we're hearing back how things actually turned out. That is
Yeah,
very nice to actually know the end of the story. And
I,
speaking of ends of stories, holy cow, there was a miracle today. I just have to mention Community actually got miraculously picked up for a sixth season by Yahoo, of all places. Yes, Yahoo is now getting into original content, and they have decided to give Community a sixth season with 13 episodes. So it got canceled from NBC, and then Hulu didn't pick it up because they had the first crack at it because they're already airing the other seasons, and now Yahoo has it. And it was just under the wire before all the actors' contracts expired today,
what,
June 30th. So,
what? Where is it going to stream to? You have to go to Yahoo and in
yeah,
the search bar, and it comes up in the search bar.
yeah, Yahoo has their own new video service thing, and they want to do original content like everyone else is doing. So this is one of their first shows, and apparently they had a whole bunch of money to spend on this venture. So the budget for the show is barely any lower than it was when they were at NBC. And the only way Hulu was going to be able to do it was to slash the budget to an eighth of what NBC was giving them. So might turn out okay. It's hilarious. I can't believe it's a little show that could.
I, I just am kind of flabbergasted by that, but okay. I did
Six
that.
seasons of the movie.
That one took me by surprise. All right, this is the AV, the podcast that answers your home theater and audio video questions. AV Rant. We've been going on for over. It's got to be 6 years now. We're past May, right? It's got to be 6 years, maybe seven. Oh no, I have to go back and look. Every once in a while, I have to go
Well,
back.
I haven't been here that long.
I have. I've been here
That's
since
right.
day one. So
You are
yeah.
the through line.
I am the through line. This week we have a listener to thank. Abel is our listener of the week. He went to our avrant.com website and donated, gave us a little money to help us support the podcast and keep us going.
Yes,
If you'd
thank you,
like-
Abel.
Thank you, Abel. If you would like to do that, you are more than welcome to the website and click on the buy us a cup of coffee. Rob doesn't drink coffee. I do, but really it's just to give you a button to click on. So there it is on the website. If you want to ask us a question, and please do, we've got lots of room for questions on the podcast, and that's what we do around here. You can contact Rob at rob@avrant.com, Tom at avrant.com. Come to the website and comment. Go to facebook.com/avrantpodcast. Or hit us up on Twitter at Rob at first. I guess Rob's at first reflect, and I'm at avrant_Tom to make things hard on yourself. Now, I guess we should go straight into the news because there's news. There was a couple of big things that happened, big enough that they showed up on normal radio. The first is Aereo, who
Yeah.
was hilariously mispronounced by an NPR guy when I was listening to the radio. He called it, I don't know what he called it, but I was like, it wasn't quite as bad as when I was in Australia and I went to a Mexican restaurant and the Australian girl said, "Can I start you off with something like some quesadillas?" I was like, what did you just say? Quesadillas? It took me 3 seconds to process
Mhm.
it down to figure out what she meant. I almost fell out of my chair. But anyways, so Aereo lost in the Supreme Court decision. So I guess I predicted that. I did predict it. I'm actually to be honest with you, I want to say I'm disappointed. I kind of had gotten behind the whole Aereo thing and thought, you know what, they kind of have a point. Yeah, I don't buy it. Yeah, it's all a bunch of BS because I kind of think the entire time they were making their case before the Supreme Court, there was somebody coughing in the back going, yeah, just I won't do that. I won't do the thing that I was gonna do, but the bull cough thing in the there's some judge just no man, that's just garbage. And you guys know it's garbage. You're not renting out actual. But I kind of like the
Individual
idea of it.
antennas, yeah.
Well, the thing is, honestly, it seems unfair that it can't be done.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Well,
It
I mean,
seems
they were
unfair that.
calling out the fact that they were essentially basing their case on a loophole, because that's what it was. That's what it amounts to, is the idea of this 1-to-1 ratio of antennas to customers and individual file folders is a loophole. I mean, it's the very definition of a loophole in a law. So,
I agree,
yeah.
but it seems to me like, for example, there's tons of people that live in my area. I'm sure any place that has a lot of skyscrapers and stuff like that. Tons of people that live there that would love to get over the air, but physically can't, but live in
Mm.
the area. Seems like you should be able to rent an antenna, or share an antenna or something like that, so that you can get the content that you're rightfully entitled to by living in that area. If I show, and that used to be it used to be kind of the case that you could just plug into your cable into, there was the free part of the of cable, where you could
Yeah.
just plug cable into your, whatever your TV was, and it would give you a certain number of channels. Those were supposed to be the ones that were local. Your local channels were supposed to be free, but now they kind of don't do that because they're digital or something. I don't know. Maybe they do it. So, but
Well, I think that was
I think it's
actually
kind of
part of
BS.
I think that was actually part of that CATV, that community
Hmm.
antenna, that was mentioned specifically by the Supreme Court as part of the decision, and basically saying, well, you're saying you have one antenna for each customer, but it's tantamount to the same thing as a CATV system.
Anyway, so they're
Yeah.
dead. They tried
Yeah.
to say they weren't going to be dead, and everybody went, yeah, exactly. How does that work? When you can't, by law, do service anymore, so they're dead. So all you people that are early adopters, I'm sorry. I know there's quite a few people that were probably still working through whatever DVR stuff they had stored, and it's all, I'm sure, obliterated at this point. So, well, welcome to Netflix, I suppose. So there's that. The
Yeah,
other
it's a
thing
little
is,
interesting that it's one of the very few Supreme Court decisions I've ever seen that, first of all, wasn't 5-4, and second of all, actually had justices, conservative and liberal justices on both sides. Both the came down on the side of the ruling and on the dissenting side. So at least it was kind of unique in that sense.
yeah, there's that. Let's see. Atmos, of course, we talked about last week. Dolby Atmos is the object-based, sound system, and they want you to have 4 speakers in your ceiling because it's hard enough getting you to put 5 speakers in your room, much less 4 more in your ceiling. But so there's lots more details about that. Dolby's
Mm-hmm.
FAQ is the place to go, really. There's tons of this. There's the MCACC white paper. There's Pioneer's got some information out. Yamaha's got information. Twice, which is where apparently we've been getting our news from, has got a pretty good kind of write-up of the whole thing. But basically, I thought the interesting things were that, yes, you were right, Rob. It will support, your normal, your normal Dolby True HD,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's sort of some sort of metadata that's going to be associated with the Atmos part of it, which will then allow you to split off certain sounds, which is pretty cool. The speakers that they're talking about are designed to work between, they say between 8 and 9 foot ceilings. I'm like, well, that's kind of specific. But they
Well,
say
that
that,
was the ideal.
yeah, but they say they'll work up to 14-foot ceilings,
Yes,
which I guess kind of assumes that you're going to be sitting much farther away if you're in a taller
but
room.
only horizontal, only flat.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
no
there's no
vaulted
fault.
ceilings, no pitched ceilings, no crazy. I mean, it has to be a hard reflective surface, as
God
you
forbid if you have
would
a
expect.
ceiling fan. Ceiling fan
Yes.
messes the whole thing
Yeah.
up. So,
Yeah, but there were some more interesting details. I mean, there's been a lot. I was sort of surveying the forums all throughout the week, and lots of speculation and misinformation and things that are said and taken out of context, and people going crazy with it, as always happens on the forums. But the sort of through line that came through it all is that we are not getting the type of system that will measure the angles and the exact locations of the speakers and adjust based on that. They are just saying, all right, it's 4 ceiling speakers. They're kind of up there in these sort of vague locations. And that is what the Atmos processors inside of this first generation of consumer level receivers is going to be using. It's going to be saying, all right, well, we know that the 4 speakers are up there and to the left and the right and kind of in front of you and kind of behind you. So even there was an image posted by well, somebody. I think he's actually a retailer, but he has like early access to the manuals, and so
Yeah.
he posted one of the images from Denon's manual where they're showing you the suggested placements, and it gives you like a 25-degree vertical range for each of the speakers, which is a pretty large range when you
Yeah.
come right down to it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not exactly going to be pinpoint precise. But what I found really interesting in the Dolby FAQ is they said for the home version of Atmos, you could actually have up to a maximum of, now they say 24 speakers on the ground. That's including subwoofers. So I'm not sure if that's like 20.4 or 22.2.
Hopefully it's 20.4.
Yeah, that would make more sense, like five on each wall, basically. But then, so those 24 speakers, however many that is, including subwoofers on the ground, and then 10 speakers overhead, 2 rows of 5. And apparently they have some partner who's already working on a 32-channel processor for the people who have that kind of room and money that could make use of that sort of thing. But yeah, so that's the maximum at home. And Yamaha, who we mentioned last week, at the time we were recording last week, they hadn't announced their Atmos receivers. Well, they've got to. They've got the RXA for their Aventage line. They've got a 2040 and a 3040. And kind of interestingly, when you read through the features of the 3040, it says that they do have a totally new YPOW with RSC, that's the reflected sound control, 3D angle sensing, all the kind of stuff that was like, oh, hey, maybe they're actually doing the thing where they sense the angles and the locations. Nope, only applies to their own Yamaha Cinema DSP. The Atmos processor doesn't make any use of that.
Yay!
So,
Yay! Wasted
But
data.
I have to say, Pioneer, their product manager, Chris Walker, has been hitting the forums and has been giving a lot of the best info that I could find, because he actually knows all this stuff. He's not just speculating. He mentioned something on AVS forum that I found kind of disturbing, and makes me believe that today or this year, these receivers are a spectacularly good year to not buy them and wait for next year. Because he was saying what happened was the HDMI chipsets, right? Oh, yay, HDMI. You know what's coming.
Yeah.
The HDMI chipsets, basically, they said they pretty much couldn't afford to have 2 separate chips for each HDMI input, that just to hit the price points they want to hit, they're using one chip for each HDMI input. And so there's a choice. You can either have HDMI 2.0 with its full bandwidth, that's 18 gigabits per second, or you could have HDMI 2.0 inputs that also use HDCP 2.2. That's the new high-definition copy protection scheme that may or may not be used in the future. If you want HDCP 2.2, the only chips that have it right now are limited to 10.2 gigabits per second of bandwidth, which is the same bandwidth as HDMI 1.4. So there's no way to get a single chip that does HDMI 2.0 at full bandwidth with HDCP 2.2. So apparently Onkyo Integra, they decided to go with the HDCP 2.2, but that means they're limited to 10.2 gigabits in bandwidth. And everyone else, Yamaha Pioneer, Denon Marantz, they all decided to go for the full bandwidth, but that means they don't have HDCP 2.2. So either way you go, you could conceivably, perhaps even likely, run into a situation in the future where this will no longer work, and it's not like they can update that with firmware. That's in the hardware chips.
Yeah, I'd probably err on the side of the 2.2, to be honest with you, the HDCP, because
right.
The extra bandwidth would be nice, but if you get something that has all the extra bandwidth there, it's just gonna there's gonna be some sort of scaling model that's gonna go on. It'll still work, but if the HDCP 2.2 is specified and needs to be there, and you don't have it, your connection will not work. Period.
That's right.
So,
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So to me, this is an especially good year, unless you are an early adopter who is fortunate enough to be able to upgrade every 1 to 2 years. And if you are, I mean, hey, good on you, congratulations. That's but then you're not really listening to us for advice or permission on what to buy. You're just going to buy it anyway. For anyone who is listening for advice or permission, I wouldn't suggest jumping on these right now because there's a high likelihood they're not going to last you a good 5 to 10 years. So.
Yeah, it's possible. I don't know that I would.
Maybe.
I mean, if you're not planning on upgrading your
Yeah.
TV for the next 5 or 10 years, then you're probably okay anyways.
I would just say proceed with caution.
Yeah, well, I would say buy last year's at a discount, depending on which one you are. All right, so that's that. Are we on to our stuff?
Well, I guess we should just mention a bit about Pioneer having sold their AV division.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Because it is kind of strange. I mean, they just announced these new Atmos-capable Elite brand receivers, the new Andrew Jones Elite speakers that go along with it, that are the Dolby Atmos-enabled speakers with the upwards firing driver placed on the top of the speaker. So they just announced all these things, but then it has been confirmed now. Pioneer, not the entire company, just the AV division within Pioneer, 51% of it has been sold to this Bearing Private Equity Asia out of Hong Kong. So that's just an equity firm. So they now own the controlling stake in Pioneer AV. And then some other portion of the remaining 49% was sold to Onkyo. So Onkyo and Pioneer are now basically partners in the AV division, but neither of them owns the controlling stake. So little bit of industry news. Who knows what that'll really mean?
I really don't know what that means at all. It means that it will still have Pioneer receivers for at least.
Yes, that's right.
I would say this year and next year. After that, it's anybody's game.
I'm thinking it means we'll see MCACC show up in an Onkyo receiver in the not too distant future. That's
well, maybe it's possible. That's possible. Yeah, I wonder how. Yeah, okay, whatever. We'll see how that goes. All right, so stuff on Facebook. So, once again, facebook.com/AVRantPodcast. Last week, Paul, our race car driver, has sponsored, our AV Rant sponsored number 72 Chevy. He had it on the test track and reports that it's running very fast, but running a bit hot. What does that mean? Does that mean it's warm inside, or does that mean the engine's getting hot?
I think it means it's actually overheating a little bit.
Yeah, okay.
Because adjustments need to be made, he says. So.
Okay, so it's not an AC issue.
If it were just an uncomfortable driver, they probably wouldn't worry about it too much.
Paul, suck at that, Paul. That's right. Let's see. Okay, now here we go with our comments and updates. Shannon H. Posted on SVS's website that he bought 2 PB2000 subwoofers because of us. Yes. Charles S. Also on Facebook, he was the one who was having problems with music cutting out as it was getting loud, during parties, I guess, or raves or whatever he was doing over there. And we told him to re-terminate or check all the terminations of his speaker wires because it was likely a short. He has taken our advice. He's got banana plugs all over the place now, which are great. And he says that it seems to have worked. Charles, I would like you to write us back in a couple of weeks after you've tried it a couple of times to check it out, a couple more times to check it out, and confirm that it is in fact fixed, because these things tend to crop up again. I hope not, but maybe. Let's see here. Jefferson, James, and Herb. We got a question last week about the UMic 1, which is a USB microphone for that you can plug into your computer and use to measure your room or measure your speakers and your room for your mini DSP or some sort of aftermarket room correction system. James over on Facebook commented that it's all any normal person would need, and it's very easy to use. And Herb over at Cross Spectrum Labs, who we did mention last week, he confirmed on Twitter, and I got that the next day too, saying that the UMic 1 is fine even with just the factory curve. Like he can make it better for you, but with the factory curve, it's pretty good. And that's a crowning endorsement if I've ever heard one.
Especially, I mean, you can tell what kind of a stand-up guy Herb is, because he could easily just say, "Oh yeah, it needs correction. You should only buy it from me." But he's like, "No, it's actually pretty decent, even if you just get it stock." So he's not trying to only sell for himself. I like.
So
that.
Herb also corrected Rob, saying that the Behringer ECM 8000, which I think is the one I have. I can't
Ah,
see it from here. I think we both have the same microphone. Uh,
it was a very popular measurement microphone.
well, yeah, and the Dayton EM-M6 are really completely different microphones. They don't share any parts. And Herb actually doesn't sell the Behringer anymore because it, you know,
Well, there was too much unit to unit variation is what he basically
yeah,
implied. Because he was like, well, sometimes the curves between the Dayton and the Behringer aren't that different, but out of the two, the Behringer's the one I don't carry anymore. So
right, right.
that's
So
yeah, kind of tells
that's
you.
just that happens a lot with these things. In fact, when we talked about to Val Colton over at VModa, that's one of the things he was really concerned about was unit-to-unit variance in
Hmm.
his headphones. And it wasn't until he was able to really lock that down that he was comfortable selling his headphones because if he got a pair of headphones, he wants them all to sound the same. That just makes sense, right? You don't want to sell two different speakers that sound completely different. That's also why people like Boston Acoustics and stuff make their own drivers because then they can absolutely control that.
Yeah.
Uh, there we go. All right, Mike G on Twitter. He uses a passive HDMI splitter. We talked a
Hmm.
little bit about HDMI splitters. You have an HDMI, let's say, coming out from your Blu-ray, and you want to have it go to two different things. We said, generally speaking, you can run into a lot of problems with passive ones, which are the ones you just plug in. There's no power. There's no handshake. A negotiation sort of navigation going on throughout the unit. But Mike says he uses one. He's got a Scientific Atlantic cable box from Time Warner and a Yamaha receiver. He says he's used a passive Rocketfish brand HDMI splitter, sending one output directly to an HDMI input on his receiver and the second output to his Xbox One. He says it works, and he only had one handshake issue in 4 months of usage. I wonder about that. My question would be: is he using them both at the same time?
Probably not. I
You
mean,
know,
that's the whole point, right? Is to be able to watch TV when you do not have your Xbox One on. So he probably doesn't have them both on simultaneously.
yeah. So I mean, but I guess my question is, okay, yeah, right. So he would not be using them at the same time, and yeah, I guess that would be all right. So for a
I mean,
passive,
it should work at that point because then the source device would not be getting back to EDIDs.
right.
That's the extended display identification data. So
So
yeah, if
basically, what
it's
he's got his cable box plugged in to his receiver, so he can turn his receiver and his cable box on and watch TV. Then
Mhm.
he's got his cable box connected to his Xbox One, his Xbox One connected to his receiver, so
Mhm.
that when he wants to do it that way, he can do it that way.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I guess that makes sense. I guess that he would only. I think the only time he would have handshake issues is if he accidentally left one on and turned the other one on, and then.
Yeah, or like the one I've definitely seen, and I mean, the thing is, if you look at like the reviews just on Amazon or at Best Buy of the passive HDMI splitters, you'll see a lot of people complaining, saying
Yeah.
this thing doesn't work, and they're blaming the splitter, which of course, you would if you had no idea what was going on or what was causing the problem. Um, but you'll see plenty of people complaining. And one of the issues is that Insta Preview that I mentioned,
Yeah.
which is only on newer receivers, right? Like I don't think the receiver that Mike has is new enough that it has that feature, or maybe it does and he just turned it off. But the thing with the Insta Preview is that it keeps all of the, or at least four of the HDMI inputs active at all times.
Yeah,
So
and then
that
there's the
that's when I
HDMI
know I've seen that
through
problem.
too, right?
Yeah.
So the HDMI through is meant to be used so that, so for example, if you wanted to use, if you had a cable box, a receiver, and a TV,
Hmm.
right? Most of the time you were watching with the receiver on, powering all your speakers, but at night when your better half was sleeping and you didn't want to wake them up, you would just use the TV speakers, the speakers on the TV. You would turn your receiver off, but it would have pass through the HDMI signal from your cable box up to your TV, and then you could use it. That might cause an issue too, even with your receiver being off. Could be sort of a thing, but
Yeah.
I've never actually used that feature. I
Mm.
can't imagine a reason why I would. My parents have got a very nice Samsung, like 55 or 60-inch plasma. I can't understand a single word coming out of people's mouths when I use
Hmm.
the TV speakers. It's like being punished for something I did in a previous life.
Anyway,
So
the point is, if you can buy a passive HDMI splitter from a place where it's easy to return it, like a Best Buy, then I
Try
mean,
it.
no harm in trying because they're cheap. They're super cheap, so that's why it's attractive, right? So no harm in trying. Might
Yep,
work.
might work. And just yeah, just make sure you don't turn two things on at the same time because then it's not gonna work. Zach C had an Onkyo receiver with an HDMI board issues that was 2 years out of warranty. He called Onkyo, and they issued a one-time out of warranty repair. It took a month before he got it back, but they did repair it. You know what? I think I had something similar to that happen on one of my receivers before I
Mm-hmm.
started working for Audioholics. Uh, and he just wanted to let everybody know that it never hurts to ask, especially if it turns out it's a known issue. Even if you're out of warranty, they might repair it. Hey, it always helps to be nice too. That's what I'm
Exactly.
going to say. When you call those
And
CSR people who don't say, "I know this is a problem. You guys have to fix it," they're gonna be like, you're an ass." And that's
and that's the thing, right? Like you'll see all the horror stories about, you'll see lots of horror stories about Onkyo. You'll see lots of horror stories now about Denon, and you'll see them about every single brand. People have said it about Pioneer and Yamaha too. And if you go to the forums or you go to the Amazon reviews, and the people saying, "Oh, they have the worst customer service and stuff," it's like, I don't really know because you hear these stories like Zach's, and it's like, no, they do actually honor their warranties. They do actually want to help their customers. I kind of question the people who say that they're as awful as they claim because I wonder if they A, really called them, or B, were horrible to the customer service people when they did call them.
I've never really
Yeah.
understood. Like I've been in airports. I just see people like
Uh,
ripping into the people there. I'm like,
I know.
what do you think you're going to accomplish by being so rude? I mean, I'm fairly blunt dude, but believe me, when I need something from you, I'm awfully nice. You would be shocked how nice I could be to
I mean,
somebody.
being direct and being firm and
Yeah,
knowing what you're asking for and knowing what you're talking about, that is all good, I think, when you're dealing with any sort of customer service, because you should know what it is that you want at the end of your call. Right? If you're coming in there
right.
sort of aimless and hoping that they'll give you the moon, that's not going to work. You should know what you're asking for. But yeah, I mean, being rude never helps. It's all humans we're dealing with. Nobody likes that. So
Yeah,
anyway, good
I
on
agree.
Onkyo for doing that, and I don't think that's actually all that rare. Like I've had that too. As long as you call and you're a reasonable person, they'll usually want and try to help you. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've even called like back when Netflix first started their streaming, I called their customer service. I was like, "You just started the streaming. Can you tell me some stuff about it?" And they're like, "Yeah, yeah, this." I'm like, "Well, what's the bit rate? What's this? What's that?" And we talked about this on podcast, like right when it first started.
mm-hmm.
And all I did was call customer service, and they're like, "Oh, let me connect you with the technician." I'm like, "Okay, yeah, just good for being nice." So yeah, be nice. Rohan, who is I think from India, right?
Yes, yes.
He had some problems with the subwoofer settings, right? The
Well,
Odyssey
that
was
and Odyssey and speakers coming back with the warning that they're out of polarity, out of phase, reverse
out of phase,
polarity,
right?
and
So
yeah,
so
volume
we gave
issues.
him many pieces of advice, and he had to wait for. I guess apparently he had to wait for his Pioneer Blu-ray player to get repaired
Mhm.
before we confirm all the changes we had suggested to set up. But everything is up and running now, and he's thrilled with the results. He adjusted his speaker and subwoofer positioning. He reran Odyssey after turning down the volume knob on the subwoofers, which is what we said he needed to do, that's because Odyssey had previously set the subwoofer output level to its lowest possible setting. It was still too loud. He turned on dynamic EQ and kept dynamic volume turned off, and he says it's a success. He says the surrounds really came to life. His subwoofer now sounds balanced with the rest of his system. He no longer has to crank the volume for movies. And he's no longer using direct mode for music because the subwoofer blends in perfectly with the speakers now. And so music sounds great in regular stereo mode. He does not have a rug, but he's getting one for sure now because apparently we know what we're talking about. And he looked into GIC acoustics, but shipping to India is prohibitively expensive. Yeah, I've been to India, dude. There's no reason why you just can't build those things yourself. Probably
Sure.
cheaper than uh,
Yep.
uh, you could. Yeah, you could
You
just
can
pay
you can get
somebody to do it.
installation, and I'm sure you can get fabric. So
Yeah, it's not that. Yeah, I'm sure you can get it. He's going to look for alternatives. Just any of these DIY solutions will do it for you, and it's not going to it doesn't cost that much. So I can only imagine how little it'll cost in India. So we'll see. So while he looks, so while he's looking into this room acoustics, he's gonna work on convincing his wife to let him put acoustic treatments in their living room. Good luck with that.
Which I have to say, the easiest way to do that is if you can use a patterned fabric, or you can get the fabric, have it dyed or printed with an image. And we've mentioned, Gek Acoustics will do that. They'll dye it. Acoustimac will print images on there. And we had what was his name? The guy who had the images of his horses, his wife's and his daughter's horses. I forget his name. Sorry about that. But if you can make them look nice and make them look like a poster or artwork or even just a nice printed panel that you might put up as decoration anyway, I definitely think that's the easiest way to convince the significant other.
The other way is to get them to watch one of those HGTV type shows where they're doing renovations and people are painting like squares on their walls and hey, we should put a square on our wall just like that, like an accent square. Your wife says yes, you're like, and it could be in the official form of a panel, and it should be right there. It's a 3D accent square thing.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. All right. Are we into questions yet? No.
Well, sort of. There's feedback and questions combined now.
Okay. Here we are. Feedback and questions, and then we get into actual. No, we got two people with this, and then we get into actual questions. Jeez. Okay. So last week we posted photos on Facebook of Jared's theater, which is that's the $500 theater. He got all of his stuff for $500. First, he clarified that he hadn't actually listened to all of our episodes, in just 2 weeks, though. He's downloaded the most recent 20 and has listened to all those. So those are all good episodes. So yay. He found someone on Craigslist selling another pair of his Polk RT55.
He had a question actually. He had a question about the easiest way for him to find the entire back catalog of all our episodes. So that's important for anyone who might want to do that. How do they do that, Tom?
I don't know. I don't have a clue. Why would I know that? You go to the website and you go to the RSS feed, find it that way. But I know my wife uses whatever her program is for podcasts. You can have it download all, and it will go back and find. She's like, my phone's full and I can't take any more pictures. I'm like, you've downloaded 800 episodes of Clark Howard. Do you really need 800 episodes of Clark Howard? Oh, jeez. So,
they are all on the website, avrant.com. Yep. Every single episode is up there. I'm not 100% sure every single link works.
No, not every single link works. So the first probably 20 or so episodes may or may not be there. Not because of anything nefarious or anything. It's just I think they got deleted off of because they were basically at first we were just we were hosting them on the website, as well as everything else. I didn't use Libsyn, I use Libsyn now, but then it started the data. I started using up too much data, and they're like, "Oh, you're taking up too much space." So you can't put those someplace else now. And I started transferring them over, and then kind of stopped and didn't care anymore. So that's how that worked. Sorry. So those first 20 episodes are hopelessly outdated at this point anyways, but I don't know, Dina's on them, so that's kind of cool.
That's right.
All right. He found someone on Craigslist selling another pair of his Polk RT55 speakers, so now he has 6 identical speakers, and never had a chance to try my suggestion of a 4-speaker setup with a Phantom Center. You can still try that. Just you can have
just for fun.
Just for fun. He mentioned that he was picking up a pair of Mirage FRX S12 subwoofers last week. He got them and says they're a huge improvement, and now realizes how much he was missing when he was using his 8-inch home theater in the box subwoofers, in quotes. He says he's happy for now, but it has him curious how these Mirage subs stack up against SVS subwoofers we're always talking about. I don't think I've ever heard the Mirage subwoofers. They're actual subs, though, right?
They're 12-inch. They've got a what is it, like a 500-watt amp or something in them, or 300, I think. But
you would honestly, you would notice a difference. Would you want to spend $1,600, $1,500, $1,400, whatever it is, get 2 of them to hear the difference? I don't know. You might not want to. Obviously, with the way you've been value shopping, I think there's gonna be a performance increase, no doubt. I doubt it would be worth the money to you at this point in your life. And so
if you got them new, they'd equal or exceed the cost of your entire system that you've spent so far. So
Yeah, that's right.
I think they're worth it, because awesome subwoofers are always worth it. But yeah, it would be hard to justify price wise compared to the rest of the system.
Okay, so now his question. He has, oh, I guess the second question. With his two Mirage subwoofers, he's wondering how or if he should be doing the subwoofer crawl. He has the two subs on opposite sides of the room, diagonally across from each other, and he's having some major difficulty trying to do the subwoofer crawl. I wonder, is that like he's got bad knees? I don't know.
Having difficulty figuring out where the two best places are by doing the subwoofer crawl. Which brings up the very good point, which is that the subwoofer crawl is really meant for one subwoofer. It's really not meant for dual subwoofers. The subwoofer crawl is all about taking your one subwoofer, putting it in your actual seat where you are going to sit, your primary seat, the seat you care the most about, actually putting your subwoofer there, playing the bass sweeps with the subwoofer in the seat, and then crawling around the room to find the one best location for that one sub. And it is that reciprocal relationship. That's the best location for that one sub for that one seat. Once you get to dual subwoofers and you're putting them in different locations in the room, one at the front, one at the back, or one on each side, you really don't need to do the subwoofer crawl anymore. That's actually the whole point of getting the dual subwoofers, is that by having them there and by positioning them that way on opposite sides of the room, you're evening out the bass response throughout the entire room across all of your seats. So the subwoofer crawl just isn't really necessary after that.
Yeah, that's why we say midpoints in the walls is sort of the best. Opposing walls is the best. You don't have to crawl for that. That's just where it is. And then you get as close to that as you can, basically. So don't worry about it, dude. You're doing fine. It sounds like he's really enjoying the subs anyway. So
yeah,
maybe don't overthink it. That's one thing that's really hard to do.
No, but I mean that's a great question, because I mean that isn't always clear, right? We're always talking about doing the subwoofer crawl, so totally makes sense. You think, hey, I got two of them now. How do I figure out the two best spots?
Yeah, I mean, I did the subwoofer crawl for my first subwoofer, and it was just my room was so awful that it was all sort of like.
Nowhere was good.
No, this all sounds so bloaty and weird, no matter where I do it. And I had a SBS sub. I'm not SBS. I had an Axiom EP500 sub, which has the world's sharpest corners on it. I was just constantly afraid I was going to pierce my leather couch, and then have my wife scream at me, "What the hell happened to the couch?" EP500 ate it. Sorry. So I was pretty. Yeah. I lost a lot.
Yeah, I mean, this is like what we were talking about there last week. When you have the dual subwoofers and you're setting them up on opposite sides of the room and diagonally across, if you cannot use the midpoints of the walls, one of them might end up in a spot where, if it were the only sub in the room, it might sound horrible there. But because you have two, you're creating, like Tom said, it's sort of like you're creating a virtual sub that's sort of in between them, or if you really want to get into it, it's all about how much more wave interaction you have and how evenly the bass waves are now distributed throughout the room. So yeah, you don't need to do subwoofer crawl to find two good spots independently. It's that both are working together now as though they were one much like more uniform sub throughout your room. It's kind of cool.
Sub. So that doesn't actually work that way. All right, Jason L wants some in-wall speaker suggestions. Whoops. I didn't read this question before just now, so Rob, you're going to be handling that. I must have skipped over this one. So our discussion of projector screens and speakers for his 17-foot wide, 14-foot long room was very helpful. I guess it was, because we told you this one of the two projectors you were looking at wasn't going to be able to even physically work. He hadn't even considered throw distance, so now he's leaning towards going with a slightly smaller screen size and moving his seat as necessary. Yay. He also hadn't considered bookshelf front speakers, having always had towers in mind. I know. Lots of people are like that. You think, it's like, oh, one of these days I'll be a big boy and I'll get tower speakers. That's not the way it really works. Not if you're going to have subs, it doesn't. He's already a big fan of ribbon tweeters, so they send acoustic Sierra 2s are definitely contenders now. Yay, Rob says. For surrounds, though, he really wants to use in-wall speakers for aesthetic reasons. He knows that it might be a compromise sonically. It's not might be. And he'd like to hear any suggestions we might have for good in-walls, particularly ones that might match the Sierra 2 speakers as closely as possible. Should he be looking for in-walls that use ribbons? All right, since I didn't actually do any research on this, I'm going to let Rob do most of the answering on this one. But I will say, from my experience, because surrounds don't get that. I know Rob's going to be like, you got to have all the same ones. My experience is that you really, sonically, it's not that important to match them, but you really do want to make sure you've got something that's got at least a similar sensitivity. You don't want to try to match a horn-loaded speaker with something that's really hard to drive. Your receiver's going to have a bunch of problems. I don't even know of any in-wall speakers that are that have ribbon tweeters, but though I'm sure they exist. Go, Rob.
Yeah, so I mean, I can answer specifically for the Sierra 2 since I'm really familiar with them. By no means do these look the same or have the same drivers or anything, but Focals, specifically the Electra BE series, if you can afford them, they're pretty pricey. But overall, from all the ones that I auditioned, they're sort of like the closest sonic match. They're, of course, not a perfect sonic match, but we are talking about the surround speakers. It isn't 100% vital that they be a perfect sonic match. So as far as in-walls that I really like for matching sonically quite well to the Sierra 2s, I would point you towards Focal. Since Ascend Acoustics, who makes the Sierra 2s, does not make any sort of in-wall speakers. So that's a specific one. In terms of, should you just look for ribbon tweeters, I haven't seen any that use the same RAL ribbon tweeters. I think there are some that use the folded ribbons that we talked about, but they're quite a different thing. I mean, just because it has the name ribbon in it doesn't mean that it actually sounds the same. The folded ribbons are quite a different sounding and dispersion type of driver than the actual RAL ribbons that are in the Sierra 2s. So I'd aim you towards the Focal in walls.
Yeah, and don't get caught up on this whole it has to have the same tweeter thing. Yes, it would be nice if you could get the same drivers in there. But even if they use the same tweeter, the same RAL tweeter that is in the Sierra 2s, it's not going to be the same components. It's not going to be the same shape box. It's not going to be the same anything else. And it could sound very, very different. I mean, there are lots of people that use ScanSpeak drivers, and not all those speakers sound exactly the same. Not all of them are sonic matches or timbre matches for each other. So, yes, don't be afraid to say, okay, yeah, it's a titanium dome tweeter, but let me give it a chance anyways. Also, if you've got some time to shop, get the bookshelf speakers that you want. Make sure that you like them before you send them back, and then take them to your local store that has speakers that you want and play them. Just say, hey, I'm going to hook these things up right here. Let's level match all these bad boys, and I want to hear how your in-wall speakers sound with them. And that right there will tell you. So that's what I would do.
That's a good plan.
I'm a crazy person. Abel, actual questions. Abel gets an update. Okay. Last week he asked a question that got us talking about what makes a speaker easy or difficult for an amplifier to drive. We talked about impedance last week. We also talked about sensitivity, and Rob mentioned electrical phase angle, but didn't have all the technical details. And guess who didn't do research about that either? This guy.
At least you got those two thumbs.
I do have two thumbs. So this week we can talk a little bit about electrical phase, or Rob can. And why don't you enlighten Abel about that?
Sure. So I'm by no means an electrical engineer or totally qualified to speak on this, but I did look into it because I was curious for myself. So the electrical phase angle is the timing difference between the voltage and the current. So if the voltage and the current were perfectly in phase with one another, they would have a power factor of 1, meaning that the wattage coming through is exactly equal to the voltage times the current. Volts times amps should give you watts. That's your theoretically maximum power. That's your assumed power, what you're hoping to get out of it. But because the speaker is drawing the current from the amplifier and the voltage is being sent as the signal, they are a little bit out of time, a little bit out of phase. And so that's measured in the angle. If you're imagining the sine wave of the voltage being sent and then the sine wave of the current following very shortly after, you can calculate how many degrees out of phase they are. So when the phase angle, which is usually shown as a graph if it's shown at all in any sort of speaker specifications, they'll try to show you a graph of the phase angle as it relates to whatever given frequency. So the math part of it is, if you take the phase angle, again, that's the difference between the voltage and the current in time, and you take the cosine of that angle, that gives you your power factor. So, for example, if they're perfectly in phase, then that's phase angle of 0 degrees, which will give you a 1 power factor. If they're 45 degrees out of phase, that'll give you a power factor of about 0.7. In other words, about 70% of the expected wattage from just multiplying the voltage and current figures together, about 70% of that actually ends up making it to the speaker and doing work, actually turning into sound. If they get up to like 60 degrees out of phase, then you're down to 0.5 in your power factor. If they somehow got 180 degrees out of phase, you're down to a 0 power factor. It wouldn't work at all. So that is where this whole phase angle, this electrical phase angle thing comes into, whether a speaker is easy or hard to drive, because if it's all kept within like plus or minus 45 degrees, out of phase, then you're looking at staying within like at least 70% of the power that you would expect is actually making it to the speaker and turning into sound. If you start getting larger phase angles, it means that less of that power is actually turning into sound, meaning the speaker is harder to drive. So in general, we're hoping that it stays between plus or minus 45 degrees if you have that graph available to you. I've definitely seen speakers that go outside of that, though. So
there you go.
That would make them more difficult to drive.
Yup.
Hooray.
Something no one's looking at but you guys. But that's cool because, it's information.
Well, it's part of it, right? It's part, because you could have a speaker that, say doesn't dip supremely low in impedance, and you might be thinking, all right, I'm in the clear. It doesn't dip super low in impedance. The guys at AV Rant told me that means it's easier to drive, but then it has horrible electrical phase angles that are way out of phase with each other, which meant, it just got a lot harder to drive now. So it is part of the design.
All right, Lars. He's never heard us talk specifically about the THX baffle wall design. Lars, the reason that this is because I had never heard about it until you brought it up. That's how obscure that was. He thinks it would be a good topic for us to describe to our fellow AV Rant listeners and would like to hear our opinions on the concept as a whole. Now, there is a website. It's an installer website where they talk about how important this is. They also link back to the THX website where they have could barely be called a blog post about it. It just has a picture and says it's cool and everyone should have one. And that's about what it says on THX. So what is it? A baffle wall is not a room within a room. It is a wall in front of a wall, essentially. And what you do is you build a wall in front of your wall. You mount speakers in it. You lay fabric over the top of it. Well, actually, you put the acoustical dampening on the front. You put acoustical dampening all around the speakers. The speakers are not supposed to be mechanically attached to the wall, I don't think. Yeah, not mechanically attached to the wall. And then in between the fake wall and the real wall, there's supposed to be more absorptive material there to keep things from whatever. And then you put fabric over the front of that whole thing, and then that becomes your projection screen for your. So
it's a false wall.
It's basically a false.
It's a false wall.
It's just like a screen at a movie theater.
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
Exactly what it is. It is if you go to the movie theater and then the lights are on and you can kind of see through the screen because it's acoustically transparent-ish. I'm not really sure how specific they are about that. I think they just play loud. you can see the speakers back there sometimes, and and that's kind of what it looks like. It's the big speakers usually. In this case, the THX website images, the speakers are very large, so that they take up about the middle third, the height-wise, the middle third of the screen, and there's three identical speakers across and two subwoofers at the bottom. And they call this a baffle wall design, which I find baffling because I'm looking at this thing going, and honestly, when I saw it, I thought, well, you should have heard the conversation Rob and I had beforehand. I was like, that's really stupid. What is this stupid thing that I'm looking at? Because it's a fake wall. I mean, we've talked about this before, right? Where you take a acoustically transparent screen and you take in walls or on-wall speakers and you mount them behind. That's basically what this is, except they made it a little bit more complicated. And
not really. I mean, they basically just built a frame to hold your acoustically transparent screen.
They wanted you to make sure that you use specific speakers. These speakers with not THX didn't say this, but this installer is like, oh, these are the best speakers they used with it, and they should be this thick, and they should be this, and it should be that. I'm like, you're just kind of doing what we're saying, but making it sound like it's like you're dressing it up into something. You're giving it a special name. You know what you're doing? You're marketing is what you're doing.
Yes.
It's like oh well, we don't have contrast. We have dynamically changing brightness on demand, which makes ours better than just contrast. It's the same thing, and that's all this is kind of. This is just the same thing.
So, okay, when I first read Lars's question, and I didn't click on the link that he sent at first, and I just heard him ask about baffle walls, I thought he was going to be asking about, there is this proposal by some people to... Okay, so imagine you have your front, left, and right speakers in front of you as normal, but then in between your front, left, and right speakers, perpendicular to your front wall, so like you're looking down the wall, you would build a wall that separates the front, left, and right speakers so that the sound from the left speaker could never cross over into the right side of the room, and the sound from the right speaker would never cross over to the left side of the room, and you pretty much build that wall all the way up to your face. So it's kind of like the old thing where two people would draw a line down a room and say, hey, that's your side and this is my side. Well, actually building a wall there. I thought that's what he was asking about, because some people have actually proposed that as a way to listen to binaural recordings without headphones. Because they're like, now the left ear only gets the left speaker and the right ear only gets the right speaker. Excuse me. I thought that's what he was going to be asking about, because that is a baffle wall. I mean, we've never really said the actual definition of a baffle, which is just anything that directs or prevents sound from moving in the direction it would normally move in free air. So any wall is a baffle wall. Any surface is a baffle. It's just anything that redirects the air movement. So I thought this was what he was going to ask about. No, this is a totally different thing. This is just putting lipstick on a pig. That's all this is. The link that he said is pure marketing. All this are on-wall speakers, which last week we talked about why we think those are a compromise. These are on-wall speakers being installed behind what is basically just a frame holding an acoustically transparent screen. And what's hilarious to me is they're trying to say all the reasons why this is better, why this is actually an advantage to you, such as it amplifies some of the bass frequencies. Yes, it does. We talked about that. That's the boundary effect. They say it creates more of a homogeneous wall of sound across the front, which is not a nice thing. That's a baffle effect of having your speakers very, very close to the wall behind them. You get a lot of sound wave interference, so that isn't something I even want. Then what I found hilarious was that they told you all the ways to compensate for having speakers on your wall, which is making the wall itself acoustically damped, having acoustic treatments back there so that it absorbs a lot of sound on the front wall itself, and then putting insulation in between each speaker, much like you would if you installed your speakers into a cabinet. Those are all the things we would do to reduce the boundary effect and reduce the baffle wall effect by having the speakers very close to the wall. They're telling you right there to do all the things that we would recommend too, but they're trying to sell it like it's somehow an advantage. All this is THX saying, look, the ideal theater would have a big screen, just like a commercial movie theater. Your center speaker would be ear height and therefore behind the screen, because if it were a flat panel, it would be blocking the image. And if you don't want a room that's like 3 or 4 feet deep behind your screen, essentially becoming useless space, if you want to minimize that to say 18 inches or 2 feet, well, you have to put your speakers on the wall. There's nowhere else for them to go. So if you're going to do all that, mostly because you want the best visual experience, well, then here's the way to do it. THX doesn't try to sell you on this being better or the best. They're just saying, well, here's the way you can do it. But the link that Lars sent actually tried to sell it as being an advantage. It's not.
Well, THX says the baffle wall in THX Cinema certified cinema controls the sound behind the screen, projecting a smooth audio experience out to the audience.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's their particular recommendation for how to build the thing, which includes all of this sound deadening on that front wall to compensate for the fact that your speakers are very, very close to the wall.
Yeah.
That's why it's there.
It says without the baffle wall, sound is uncontrolled behind the screen, producing a weak sound image that jumps across the screen. That's all THX says about it, really.
Yeah, I mean, they shouldn't call it a baffle wall. They should call it a baffle compensation wall. That's what they should call it, because that's what it is. I mean, it's a good practice. I have no problem with the practice itself, because it totally makes sense. I wouldn't want to waste 3 or 4 feet of my room's length so that I can have a nice airspace behind my acoustically transparent screen that I will never see and never be able to use. I'd rather only use 18 inches to 2 feet behind my screen. This is a good practice, but it is not an advantage over regular floor standing speakers. So
yeah, I just kind of stared at it, like I kept trying to figure out if there was any truth to anything they were saying, and it's it's kind of like sprinkled in there like sprinkles on top of a big crap donut made of poo. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, look at this garbage. I mean, there's some truth here. There's some good stuff, but most of it's just garbage, and that's what it is. I mean, it's a perfectly fine design. That's the thing. I don't want you to take away from this that what we're saying is that it's bad. No, this baffle wall design is perfectly valid and should be done if you decide to do it. If you decide to have a whole big wall up front, put your speakers behind it. This is something that you might want to, especially if you're going to install them into a cabinet, which is basically done, then you should do all these things. But don't try to sell it as being the way that things should be done, because that's absolutely not true. So, that being said, let's move on to his next question. Lars again. I'd like to know what we think about the new MK Sound, the 300 series speakers. MK Sound are shoot. I'm gonna have to click on the link to get. Is it Miller and Kressler something? I can never.
Well, it used to be Miller and Kreisel.
Kreisel, that's it. I can never remember.
Yeah, that's where the MK came from.
They of course they shut down years ago. During the run of this podcast, I think it might have been at the very beginning they shut down, and we talked about it. But they were bought up by some Danish company or something, and now they're MK Sound.
I don't know if they're Danish. They might be Denmarkian.
Oh, what did they say? What are they? Denmarkian.
Dude,
that's right, Denmarkian. I was like, wait a second. Don't
call back to last week there, folks.
Oh my God, that's funny. I have a friend who's a Dane. He used to get mad because I would get confused all the time. I'm like, oh, all you guys are Scandinavian. It's all the same. Shut up. Anyways, okay. So, anyways, they have put out some new speakers with the M&K under the M&K label, the S300s. Before they went under, they used to have the S150s.
Yep, the 150s were the standard. I mean, the S150s were really, really well-known, extremely widely used speakers, like pretty much all the stuff at Skywalker Sound, lots of different production houses around the world. Those were like the standard speakers that they would put into their dubbing stages or their pre-dubbing stages. So lots of movies have been mixed on M&K S150 speakers.
Right.
Yeah.
So these new 300s are essentially very similar to the old 150s, except bigger, and
Hmm.
now they have scan speak drivers for the most part. Uh, they're very square, they're very black, uh,
Almost cubic.
almost cubic. Yes, the mains have three tweeters going down the side and two woofers next to them. The surrounds have a woofer over a tweeter, which is a little unusual, and then they have two side-firing full-range drivers. So they call those tripoles. Uh, and then they have a subwoofer which has a design I haven't seen in a while, which has a woofer on the front and a woofer on the bottom. The bottom woofer actually fires up and into the cabinet to help push the front woofer out more, I guess. Every time I
It's
see that
almost like
design,
it's like an active port.
yeah,
Like instead of
it's
just being
exactly
a
what.
port where the air moves in and out, it's like and not just a passive radiator where there's a flexible part of the cabinet that can move in and out as the air is being forced in and out by the active driver. This is like an active port. It's actually aiding in pushing the air even further when it's inside of the cabinet. Yeah.
So the question here, if we go back to, I'd like to know what we think about these new speakers. I'll tell you what I think about these speakers. I think they are incredibly expensive to be speakers that look exactly like the old speakers that were discontinued like 5 years ago and have not really been upgraded since then. Now, have upgraded them. They have upgraded them. There's no doubt about that. Okay, they've got different drivers in them. They've got scan speaker, very well-known drivers, and a lot of people use them because they're good. But they're also for a 5.1 system over almost $18,000, and for $18,000, would very much like to have something that doesn't look exactly like something that didn't cost $18,000 5 years ago. So now, do I think they sound good? Chances are they probably do. They probably sound very good. I would not be shocked to know that to discover that if I listened to them, I would think they sounded fantastic.
Well,
Uh,
I mean, yeah, they even said that some of the was it the Skywalker or the T I think it was THX, the actual THX testing labs. They've actually selected to use these new S300 speakers as their basically reference speakers in their labs. So, they're carrying on that same tradition. They were really popular because they were very, very neutral, very, very linear speakers. They told it like it is. Actually, for a little bit of background, folks know I'm a big fan of Ascend Acoustics, and David Fabricant, who's the owner and the chief designer over there. He used to work at M&K. That's where he got most of his experience designing speakers. So, I am a fan of that very linear, very neutral, uncolored sound. Just tell it like it is. And if THX is evaluating them and saying, yeah, these are the type of speakers that we want to use, then I have no trouble believing that they're still carrying on that tradition.
they're just awfully expensive. I used to like the M&K speakers back in the day because you had the option of getting them in an angled box. You remember
Mm-hmm.
those? Where you would
Yep,
sit
I
them
do. Yep.
all on the ground, all three front speakers on the ground, they kind of angled up and pointed towards the listening position, which I thought, was kind of cool for all of us that were interested in having a big screen someday. Uh, these don't do that. I don't know if they ever are planning to do that. The website is completely a mess. It's hard to navigate, and even when you can, like the speaker clearly has three tweeters and two woofers, but the specs say one tweeter and one woofer. So clearly somebody's got to do some updating in the website. So they have a review over on Stereophile, which is positive because of course it is. But 17 grand, 18 grand,
Yeah.
it's a lot of money.
I mean, Lars's questions here is sort of, I'm inferring that he's maybe looking at a THX system for
Yeah,
himself. I mean,
yeah.
that seems to be what's interesting him. And, I certainly have no problem with it. I just think that for the amount of money, I don't think you need to spend this much to get, very, very satisfactory performance. I mean, these are meant for a really large room because the S150s could play plenty loud. They were fine for a full dubbing stage to hit reference volume. So these S300s are for, practically like a full-size theater. So I don't think they're really going to be needed in a regular size house. I don't know. Maybe Lars has a huge house, so.
Maybe, but if you're, you see, that's one of the things. They are THX. I think these are. I think even the new ones are THX certified,
Yep.
and which is fine. But understand this: it's not like you have to do anything magical to be THX certified, other than just apply for it. Essentially, you have to play cleanly down to like 80 hertz or something like that, or whatever it is for the bookshelf, I mean, it's if you think about THX's kind of goals there, it's just to make sure that everything will work well together. Well, guess what? All the speakers we recommend to you will work well together, and they'll all play reference volumes at in your room, and that's another thing that THX is going to be worried about. So, do you need THX speakers? You do not. You don't need a THX certified receiver either. It doesn't really mean that your receiver is lacking in any way. They used to. I remember back, and they haven't gotten away from this, but it used to be like Onkyo, whatever. Every other year they would get THX certification.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that the years in between when they didn't have THX certification, they couldn't have gotten it? No, they probably could have gotten it. They just didn't want to pay for the certification process, which costs a lot of money. So, don't. It's not like, especially with speakers, it's not like you're getting anything extra. At least with the receiver, you're going to get the special DSP modes that you can not use. But we're going to tell you not to use.
And the annoying re-EQ that you'll want to manually turn off every single time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, really with these, all they're doing is making sure that they play loudly and they're linear enough. Well, that's fine. If you really want to have the same speakers that people are mixing stuff on, well,
Right.
you have to spend $17,700 for 5.1 speakers. I don't have to have that. I want to have speakers that are better than those, to be honest with you, and I'll spend less. But that's just me. All right. Let's see here. John B. over. How are we doing on time? I haven't even looked yet. Oh, it's only been an hour. Last time I said it's only been an hour. The next thing I knew, it was over 2. John B. over on Facebook. He asked if there's a technical reason why the majority of speaker and subwoofer ports are round rather than rectangular. He says a few years ago, his company moved into a new building and the studio used round air ducts. When the air conditioning came on, it would make a whirring, whistling sound. They replaced the round air ducts with rectangular ones, and that got rid of the noise. He says that they were told that the round air ducts caused the noise due to the way the air moved through the shape of the duct. If that's the case, why would speaker and subwoofer ports be round? Well, John, don't believe everything your HVAC people tell you. Let's start right there, okay? Because those guys, and this is not just them. This is just people in general. Especially like this happens in the AV world too. We just talked about this last week, where that other podcast, basically all the sort of common folk knowledge of how to listen to stereo music and turning off your subwoofer for it was just being spewed out. It's just the kind of stuff that gets passed down. Well, this is something that's getting passed down through these HVAC guys, at least in this particular case. Yeah. First of all, subwoofer ports are generally flared on either side. All right, that's to help reduce any sort of weird noise that might come out of it. The puckering look of the Axiom speaker ports are also meant to do that. Frankly, it's really not the shape of the port as much as it is the size of the port and how much air you're pulling through it at any given time. For instance, you can have a sub that sounds perfectly fine in your room, okay? Doesn't make any difference what shape or size the port is. You can put it in a bigger room where you have to turn it up much louder, and suddenly you're noticing port noise. Why? Is it because of the shape of the port? No, it's because you're asking it to play so much louder, and it's pushing so much more air around that now suddenly the amount of air going through that same size port is making a noise. Rob.
Yeah, when it comes to the air ducts, this is, like Tom says, it's all about the size. So it wasn't that you moved from a round duct to a square duct and both of them had the exact same internal volume, it was that you probably moved to a square duct that maybe filled up the entire size of the available bay in your ceiling joists or in your wall studs, and that is a rectangular shape. So you have maximized how much air can move through there, whereas the round duct was constricting the airflow in some way. So, I mean, we're familiar with this. If you create a smaller size, if you just had like a tube and you swung it around to make that whirring sound, right? If you had a much wider tube, it would produce a much lower note, and it wouldn't be nearly as loud. So this is, when you look at if you were to make a square port inside of a subwoofer, well, let's imagine that the diameter of the round port is equal to the diagonal distance between two corners of a square port, right? So the square port, in other words, would fit perfectly inside of the round port. And if you spun the square port around, it would actually carve out that circle. Well, that square port now is smaller. It's smaller than the circular port. So if you're talking about size and you're limited by that diameter, well, the round port actually gives you more size. So that is an advantage in that case. You'd have to make a square port where the circle could fit fully inside of the square before you had a larger square, and that means cutting out more of your cabinet. That might make the structure of the cabinet weaker. There's also the fact that when you're building the cabinet, it's a heck of a lot easier to build the cabinet and then drill out a round hole. I mean, that's just a logistic reason why they're round, because that's pretty much the way they make the ports. They build the cabinet, they drill out a round hole, and then they stick a plastic tube in there, and there's your port. Whereas if you're creating a square port, you have to build that in.
It's not unheard of to have non-round ports. There's tons of slot ports.
Slot ports, and like HSU has triangular ports on one of their subwoofers.
That's just weird. That's just being weird.
But I mean, that was them getting as large a port as they could into that cabinet. It turned out to be triangles, because if it had been circles, it would have been circles that fit within the triangle. Now they can add that little bit of air in the corners of the triangle.
Right. So it's really what it comes down to. Yeah. So, John, it's a good question, though. It's a good question. There are lots of slot ports out there and square, rectangular ports. Not square. I haven't seen very many square ports. I think that HSU might have the only triangular port, too. I've never really seen. But like even if you look at if you end up going to the website that we were talking about, well, first of all, the M&K S300, whatever their stupid subwoofer is, that has a big old slot port at the bottom of it. But that baffle thing, if you look at those speakers that they've used in there, they have slot ports going all the way up the side of those things on both sides in order to maximize their port. How much air can come through, and they're very, very thin slits, but they're almost top to bottom. So you can see them there as well. Okay. Who's next? Shane from New Zealand. Yay! There's a thing they say about in Australia. There's a thing they say about New Zealanders that I'm not going to repeat on this podcast, but this every time I think it. And I have got some really good friends that come from New Zealand, so I don't think it's true. He's been listening for about 4 years now, so long-time listener, first-time writer. He knows that I'm a fan of Porcupine Tree, which is true. Shane wants to know if I've heard Steve Wilson's Get All You Deserve concert on Blu-ray. He highly recommends it. I have not heard it, but I will see what I can do about getting it, because I am a Porcupine Tree fan, especially their live concert stuff, even though he really needs to get a little bit more energetic. Some of the stuff I've seen, I'm just like, you're just going to stand here the whole time, aren't you? All right. He's heard us describe the process of making sure that two subwoofers are SPL matched, but we haven't described the process for making sure that they are also phase matched. Shane's concerned that this is very important. He'd like us to cover it as a topic. All right. Phase matching your subs. We talked about this a little bit before the podcast started. There are some receivers where they have two subwoofer outputs. Some of them will allow you to set different distances for each one. If that's the case, you don't have to worry about it, because by setting those distances, you are basically setting the phase for it. That being said, if you are placing them in your room in the way that we're suggesting, you don't really have to worry about phase that much. But the thing that occurred to me the first time I read this question immediately was that the wavelength of the sound is so long that you are you're unlikely to see that much difference from a few feet difference in how close you're sitting to one sub to the other. Uh, and if you are seeing a difference, well, then you've got bigger problems than where you're sitting.
Yeah, the reason we've never discussed a procedure for adjusting the phase on a dual subwoofer setup is because it's often not even an option, and because there is no nice, easy procedure for doing this. So here's the thing. When you're dealing with these very, very long wavelengths in the bass, the reason that the phase of the subwoofer as it relates to the phase of your speakers can end up being a problem is because there is that crossover region. There's that region between about 40 hertz and 160 hertz where both the subwoofer and your speakers, they're both playing those frequencies. And so when you have phase mismatches at your seat, very importantly that we're talking about at your seat, you get these peaks and dips and cancellations and double ups. And that's where adjusting the phase on your subwoofer or adjusting the phase on your speakers, although that would start to throw off your imaging if you did it on that end. But adjusting the phase there is all about trying to just avoid the big peaks and dips that happen because of the phase of these wavelengths that are bouncing all around your room and doubling up and canceling out. So this is an important thing, but it's only important if you're dealing with non-optimal placement. Because when we're talking about having these two subwoofers on opposite sides of the room, and if you can't have them at the midpoints, have them diagonally across from each other, the whole idea of that is they're playing in phase with each other and essentially acting as one subwoofer. And so that all of those peaks and dips that we're worried about sort of get evened out throughout your entire room, across all your seats. Where adjusting phase individually comes in is when you don't have that optimal placement. Like, for example, when you have both of your subwoofers at the front of the room, which a lot of people like to do. And that is where you basically have to take what is a brute force approach to getting them to sound nice at your seat or across all of your seats, which is sort of a pie-in-the-sky dream for that setup, but you can try to do it. So the problem is a lot of subwoofers have no method of adjusting the phase. They might have a polarity switch. They might go between 0 and 180, or they might have a knob that...
useless anyways. I mean, it's useless. I've never had anybody flick that switch and go, oh my god, the difference is night and day. It's not. It never works. I've flicked a lot of those switches, and they don't do anything. I don't even know why they're
not really, because you're literally just turning it upside down. So they'll still line up where they line up. You just turn nulls into peaks and peaks into nulls or something. It doesn't... Yeah. The 0 180 doesn't really do a whole lot for you, but there are some that give you a knob that's either continuously variable, you can adjust the phase to your as much as you want, or ones that give you a selection of different angles. So if you're really worried about it and you're saying, hey, I know either I have a really irregularly shaped room, so there is no way of putting them on opposite sides, or I know that for aesthetic reasons or just because I want to, I'm going to place both of them, at the front of my room or both of them at the back of my room or something like that, then you'd want to make sure that you have some way of adjusting the phase. Now, Shane, he went ahead and got one of the mini DSPs, so he's got his one subwoofer output coming from his receiver feeding into the mini DSP, and the mini DSP can do phase adjustments as well as some EQ and send it out to two different subwoofers. So that's one way too, is an outboard box. But how do you actually adjust it in a procedure to make sure you get it right? Unfortunately, there's no quick and easy way. It's basically trial and error and measurement. You're going to want to make sure you measure, and you're going to want to measure at every single seat that you care about, and you're going to have to, little by little, I mean, normally you leave one of your subwoofers fixed. You just leave one subwoofer alone phase-wise, and then you just adjust the other one, and you do it little by little, measure, listen, play your sweeps, measure, listen again, rinse and repeat over and over and over until you get the flattest response that you can. And it can be done. It can absolutely be done. That's the procedure to do it. It's just tedious as all get out.
That's what I've talked about on the podcast a number of times with people worried about their subwoofer placement and stuff, and I'm like, you can do that, and you can do it in more than one way too. I mean, if you don't have that continuously variable knob, you can change the distance on your AV receiver and for your subwoofer, and that messes with phase. So, yeah. But you can only imagine how much fun that would be. And that's why, like the custom installers, the guy who first, and I've been talking about this since just about this entire podcast, and every time this subject comes up, I'm like, yeah, technically it's possible. But when the custom installer guy goes, oh my god, That should tell you something about how much of a pain in the ass this thing is. He's like, well, you could technically do it, but
Yeah.
I would never recommend you trying. And he didn't just mean me. He said basically he didn't want to do it either. So yes, if you've got problems with phase in your subwoofers, it's not like I mean, you've got really big problems. You know that generally speaking, just put them in your room, you're fine. I've never gone into and I'm very sensitive to phase. Like I've walked into rooms and gone, "Ooh, that's not right." People are like, "What? No." Like, yeah, you've got a phase issue, and I'll run around switching speaker terminals till I figure out which one's the problem. But yeah, I've never once thought that that subwoofer sounds like it. You need to flick that switch.
Yeah,
Um,
the Odyssey sub EQ HT system that sometimes comes along with Mult EQ XT 32. Not always. You have to make sure specifically that sub EQ HT is there. I mean, it's not as advanced as it might sound. All it does is it independently sets two subwoofers. It sets their level, their sound pressure level, and their distance independently, and then it EQs them together. It plays them both simultaneously to adjust the EQ, and that's the correct way to do it. I mean, that is adjusting your phase and your levels so that they're SPL matched and phase matched at your seat, at just one seat. I can't stress that enough. It's only happening for that first location, the primary seat, but at least you've got that much set, and then it plays them as mono and just the EQ. Pioneer, they just announced for their new Atmos capable receivers, they've got this new MCACC Pro version, their multi-channel acoustic compensation program Pro version, and they're touting that, oh, we have independent subwoofers, but they're really doing independent. They're doing the SPL, the phase or distance, and the EQ separately for both subs, which is not the way you want to do it. You don't want to have two independent EQs, because now when they play together, who knows what your frequency response is going to be. You just went from two separate ones done separately into combining them into one, and that's going to throw off your frequency response again. So this, even when it's an automated program like that, it's not necessarily going to work out perfectly. So
but that's not what people want to
tricky
hear.
Stuff.
That's the thing to understand, is that people are like, I've got two subs, I want them EQ'd separately. Why aren't you EQing separately? Well, that's not the best way to do it. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense to me, so why don't you do it the way I say, because I am... I'm paying the money, and they're like, okay, let's do that. All right. Speaking of subwoofers, a couple of months ago, he replaced a PSB Series 300 and a JBL Studio 550p. I have no idea which either of those are. Dual subwoofer setup with a pair of SVS PB2000 subwoofers. He says his old subs weren't bad. With the PB2000 pair, wiped the floor with them. Basically, you're my Mirage guy. That's kind of what you would experience. It's like they weren't bad. They were pretty good.
They are pretty good subs.
They were pretty good, but now I have to redo all the bolts in my room. And there's things vibrating I didn't know could vibrate, but they were pretty good to begin with. So he's using a mini DSP to split his lone subwoofer output and apply a little bit of EQ. He's using a JBL Studio 590. This is a good question. He's using a JBL Studio 590 towers and a JBL Synthesis LS center. Okay, the Studio line and the Synthesis line are two different lines. All right, and the Synthesis line is a lot more expensive, isn't it? Isn't that like the big one, right? That's the big one. So so he's got like two of the towers, like the biggest speakers from the Studio line, and then the center channel from the more expensive line. And he's found that the tonal match between the towers and the center to be very poor. You're like, oh, what? Yeah, just because it's the same speaker manufacturer, just because they're using similar-ish drivers, doesn't mean that they're going to be a tonal match. So rather than doing that, he's been running a phantom center, which means he just unplugs the center channel, tells his receiver he doesn't have one, and then just uses the towers and splits the center channel information between the two. Now, what he's asking us is there is in the Studio line, there's a much cheaper center channel in there, the 520C center channel, even though it has smaller drivers. Okay, because the tower has a horn-loaded tweeter and two 8-inch woofers. The center has a horn-loaded tweeter, same tweeter, I looked it up, and two 4-inch woofers. So might that sound better despite its smaller drivers? Well, Rob, I'll let you answer first. I know exactly what my answer is, so I'll let you answer first.
Well, I mean, normally, hopefully, JBL is a good brand. Although I've always wondered with the amazing research that they do, why their consumer level speakers don't sound better than they do. Because I don't think they sound bad, but I don't think they sound that great, and it surprises me because Harman, who owns JBL, does so much really good research. But their synthesis line, that's like where they put all their technology. Their
Yeah, it
synthesis
really
line is
is.
their pro line, and they're fantastic. The synthesis speakers are fantastic. They're huge and they're expensive and they're meant for gigantic theaters. But if that's what you're doing, then they're great. But they do try to make the speakers within a line. Within a series like the studio series versus the synthesis series, they do try to make those within the series all have very similar timbre and tone. And going from one series to another, even though it's the same manufacturer, by name only, because the synthesis brand is like they're almost a completely separate arm
Yeah, they
of
really are.
JBL.
Yeah.
So, you know, from that standpoint, I think you'd have a better chance of that studio version center, even though it's smaller and less expensive, of actually tonally matching the studio towers more closely. That's probably in all likelihood going to happen. The issue, though, is the entire reason that the timbre and tone don't match very well, is that all because of the speakers, or is some of that because of placement? Because I don't know what placement he has.
Yeah.
And you can have three identical speakers, all vertical, so you're not changing one to a horizontal layer. You can have all three perfectly identical speakers. They sound the same, just the speakers themselves, but due to placement, due to how the center is positioned and set up, it can still sound different tonally.
That's
So
true.
yeah,
Okay, I
that's
agree.
the question.
I think that the studio line, they'll all sound similar enough that you'll probably be happy. My concern is I didn't really think about placement though. That is a good question to ask. If you got a plant in front of it, or if it's sitting on the ground and firing up, or if it's way up high or something weird, yeah, that could be an issue. If you've got it stuck in a cabinet,
Hmm.
yeah, that might be an
Or
issue too.
it's just on a stand but pushed way back.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people have that, right? They'll have their center speaker on a TV stand, but they got it pushed way back, so you actually have the surface of the stand protruding in front of the center speaker. So you're getting this crazy reflection off of that hard table surface in front of it. We always recommend, if you have your center speaker on a TV stand or something like that, bring it forward so that the front of the speaker is proud of the stand that it's on. It's hanging out over the edge a little bit. So
Yeah,
it might be something as
your
simple as
wife's gonna
that.
love that one, by the way. Let me just tell you. My mom, my mom used to take the center channel and she just kept pushing it back.
And push it
And it
back.
was
Yeah.
on it was on top of a cabinet too. Like it was like I can't even see the center channel. She's like, "Oh, I don't want to see it." I'm like, "Yeah, but if you can't see it, you can't hear it." She's like, "But it's up there." I'm like, "God, it's not an act of faith, all right? You have to actually see the damn thing." All right, so my concern would be this. My concern would be the size of your room. If you've got these big towers and you've got this much larger synthesis center, it makes me think you got a huge room. The center for the studio line is much smaller. Does that mean it won't fill up a big room? I don't know. How big's your room? So that would be the thing I would be afraid of. Tonally, if you with the correct placement in a normal size room, you're probably going to be able to you're probably going to realize a much better center channel image with that studio center. If you've got a huge room or you've got weird placement, it may not really make a difference which one you go with. But I think all things being equal, yes, the studio line center is going to match better than the synthesis center, which is obviously not. So
Yeah, he wanted to ask a little bit just about just our opinions on the practice of using that phantom center setup instead of a physical center speaker. Speaking for myself, I got no problem with that. I've done that several times because I've had the situation where either the center that existed in the line didn't really match because it was poorly designed or poorly executed speaker, or it was a matter of I just didn't have anywhere to place the center where it would end up sounding the same. And so I quite like using the Phantom Center. I will much sooner do that, use the Phantom Center, than live with a really bad tonal match out of a physical center speaker. I don't
oh,
know.
I've done it too. I've
Yeah.
definitely done it. My parents' house up in North Carolina before they moved down here, they had in-wall speakers, and their TV was too damn big to put a center channel in the wall anywhere. It'd have to be like right next to the ceiling. And I was
Hmm.
like, you know what? You're just gonna run a center channel, Phantom Center. I mean, you're just gonna do Phantom Center. And they're like, what does that mean? I'm like, you're not having a center channel. Don't we need one? I'm like, I get in trouble for saying this. I say it all the time. It is the least important speaker in your entire setup. I don't care what anybody. They're like, oh, that's where all the dialogue come from. Yeah, tell me what other speaker you can go into your setup and just turn it off and have the other speakers do it for you.
Hmm.
Subwoofer, technically, yeah, you can do that. No,
Not
none of
really.
us have. Not really. None of us have speakers that can do that. Really, truly full range speakers. And if you could, you would not want to put them where they need to be for the subwoofer to sound good. So, no, yeah, it's the center channel. It's the least important speaker, even though it has most of the dialogue in it. But most of the dialogue can also come from the two main speakers. The problem
Yep.
is that if you're not sitting between them, the phantom center
Right.
ends up coming out of one speaker. Well, that's the price you pay. So, I'm fine with it. Galen has an Onkyo TX SR 805 receiver that he was really happy with, but its HDMI board is failing. These things happen, dude. He talked to Onkyo, and they said that the 805 HDMI board is no longer available. Ooh, it sucks. So repair would be difficult, but they would offer a large discount on a 1 to 3 year old model, such as the TX NR818 or the 828. Other models might be possible, but Galen isn't totally certain at this moment. So those are the two that they kind of offered him. So here's his options, and he wants us to weigh up. Either he could try to have the 805 repaired, but it might not even be possible, and he's going to be waiting for months probably. You could purchase an HDMI switch and just use other connection methods for his audio, meaning that he's just going to bypass the video out, through his receiver and just go straight to the TV with his HDMI for his well, I guess it's HDMI. Yeah, go straight to a TV with this HDMI, and then use like optical or something, which of course means he can't get Dolby True HD or any of those 7-point surrounds, or get one of those other ones that they're offering him at this moment, or by looking to getting a different model from Onkyo. So, what would we recommend?
I would recommend taking them up on the offer for the 818, and I would definitely choose the 818 over the 828. For whatever reason, the 818 was like a standout when it came out. It was, when it came out, and still remains if you can find it, one of the least expensive receivers that had Odyssey Mult EQ XT32. It does not have sub EQ HT, the dual subwoofer setup thing, but it does have XT32, which is a really good room correction system. The 828, whatever happened the next year, dropped all the way down to regular Mult EQ, not even Mult EQ XT, Mult EQ, which I'm kind of hesitant on recommending. So to me, the 818 is definitely the superior model out of those two. It should be quite affordable given its age now at this point.
I think on
And
Amazon right now it's like a 750 or 725 or something.
yeah, and
Yeah.
and he's getting an extra discount because it's basically in lieu of a repair.
Yeah.
So that would be the one I'd spend the money on. That'd be the way I'd go.
Yeah, I was looking at the 818, 828. 828 has Bluetooth and Wi-Fi built in or something like that.
Yeah.
But like Rob said, they dropped the Odyssey, which I didn't notice at the time. I was like, oh, 828 looks a little bit better. They look about the same. They got pre-outs. They both got pre-outs, full
Hmm.
pre-outs, and all that. So you can add an amp later if you want to.
Hmm. And
Uh,
he's got like those RBH T2 speakers, those crazy gigantic
oh,
RBH
does he really?
speakers. He might easily make use of an external amp. So
Yeah,
so there's
yeah,
that. They can do it.
that as well. Um, yeah, I don't know that I would go with the HDMI switch. I mean, there's no reason to think that just because the HDMI board has failed, other things are going to fail. But come on, dude, seriously. So, if there's another model from Onkyo that you're really curious about, you could ask about it. I think of the two that you gave us, I think Rob's right. I'd go with the best Odyssey I can get my hands on, because that really is where you're going to realize most of your benefits. But take a nice close look at what it is that you care about. Is it external amp? Is it Odyssey? Is it instant preview or whatever it is? All those things. Look at all those different little things. Is it Wi-Fi? Is it Bluetooth? What are the things you care about? And then say, okay, well, this one from Onkyo does it, and 2 years ago this one did it, and let's see what kind of deal they can make. I would get a new receiver if it were me. Because if not, I mean, you're still going to end up having to pay for something. I mean, the repair. Not to mention how much time you're going to be out of having a receiver, which would suck. And I've gone through that, and it's awful. That's what we recommend. What are we doing time-wise here? I don't want to go too long. 34. Okay. Dan, he has two setups, a 5.1 system in his living room and a 2-channel music system in another room. He has 2 identical SVS subwoofers, 1 in each room, but we've talked about dual subwoofers so much that he decided to try having both subs in one room, noting that it might turn out to be an expensive experiment if he likes it too much. Yep, that happens. He has an... God, this thing is the bane of my existence. He has an Emotiva XSP1, and for those of you that can't keep the X's, S's, and P's clear in your head, this is the fully analog, no digital anywhere on it preamp majigger.
Stereo processor or stereo preamp. That's why it's SP.
Yeah, whatever. Instead of PS, whatever. It has 3 subwoofer outputs, left, right, and summed. The manual describes using 2 subwoofers and a stereo subwoofer left and right setup. What are they talking about? What are the stereo subwoofers, and how should he go about connecting his 2 subwoofers to the XSP1? Will it make any? Will it make a difference? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Go with that. But I'm going to describe what these 3 subwoofer outputs are, and Rob's going to tell you what we both think as to what you should do. Okay.
All right.
So it's got 3 subwoofer outputs: left, right, and summed. Okay, left and right, basically, because you're getting your your full range signal in to your receiver or your processor in this case, right? So your left channel is getting something between 20K and 20,000K, and then the K, did I say K? Hertz.
Hertz. 20 hertz and 20,000 hertz, yes.
Right. And the right is getting a different thing. And sometimes those are the same if it's a mono signal, and sometimes they're different if it's a stereo signal. It may be in the bass, while there may be different things going on in the treble and the mid-range, but sometimes the bass is identical across, and sometimes they're a little bit different. So the left one takes that bass and splits it out to the left output, the left subwoofer output. The right subwoofer output takes the bass from the right speaker input and breaks that out into the right subwoofer. Okay, stereo subwoofers. Right. Now the summed takes both of them together and takes it and puts it out to one single subwoofer. In this case, you have 2 subwoofers. So what you would have to do if you wanted to use that one is you would use a splitter to split that summed one out to both your 2 subs. Okay.
Yep.
So we've already talked about it a little bit, so I think at this point you already know, Dan, the answer to this question, but I'm going to let Rob tell you anyways. Go on, Rob.
Yes, you will want to get yourself a little Y splitter and use the summed output to feed both of your subwoofers. You do not want stereo subs. Stereo subs are this nice idea. Intuitively, they make sense. This is for the people who say, hey, this signal is saying to play, let's say, 30 hertz out of only the left speaker. That's what the signal says. So isn't that what I want? Don't I want either a full range speaker in the left that can play that sound, or I can attach one subwoofer to the left speaker only and one subwoofer to the right speaker only, so that if the signal says to play 30 hertz out of only the left speaker, that's what'll happen. Isn't that what I want? No, that's not what you want. It's a nice idea. There are people who want it, and that's why Emotiva built it that way. But once the sound reaches your seat, it is not going to be linear, it is not going to be accurate to the signal, and the sound is omnidirectional anyway. Your ears aren't going to be able to tell where 30 hertz is coming from anyway, so it doesn't matter if it's coming out of only the left or only the right, and that's not what you want, because that's not going to be the best location in your room for it. So only use the summed output, and in this case, split it between both of your subwoofers. Don't use the left or right.
Now remember, we keep talking about how having dual subwoofers equalizes the bass response, or it levels out the bass response across your room. If one subwoofer is only getting the left and one subwoofer is only getting the right, then there's no way, unless they're both getting the same thing, it doesn't. They're not playing the same thing in order to equalize the bass across your room. So if one starts hitting a note and the other one's not doing it, well, remember we talked about how it doesn't make any difference what the placement is. If that was a bad placement for a single sub, because now that you've got two, you don't have to worry about that. Well, now suddenly you have to worry about it again.
Mm-hmm.
So you're defeating the purpose. So why do they have it? For the same reason why people believe that you should go pure direct for
Yep.
listen to stereo. For that same reason, because it makes intuitive sense to people, and they've tested it and they don't know how to set up subwoofers, and there they go. All right. Honestly, that's what it comes down to. They don't know how to set up subwoofers. Okay. So it is what it is. Gary, Infinite Gary. He heard John Harrington from Sharp say that at an industry event that their Quadtron it transforms into lions and then a big robot and forms blazing sword.
Where is our Voltron movie? Why hasn't that happened yet? Come on.
Can I just say that when the sword came out in Pacific Rim, I literally went, of course they did. I was just like so excited the sword came out. All right. Quadtron displays with their fourth yellow subpixel. He says that adds 1 billion more shades of color, resulting in stunning color reproduction and great detail. But then Gary read a Wikipedia article that more or less debunks those claims and says that the fourth subpixel serves no useful function. What's the truth? Okay, Gary. Now, there's all sorts of if you read that Wikipedia article, it goes into some pretty like they measured stuff and stuff.
Sure.
I actually read one of the links from there where it linked back to some magazine, and the whole PDF, the whole issue of the magazine was online. I downloaded it and scrolled to the right article and stuff like that. What it comes down to, Gary, is like what we talk about when we're talking about the sort of signals, and even audio, right? They have these super tweeters, right? Like, there's no information on the disk that will be playing in a super tweeter, right? There's literally nothing on the disk, but yet they put the super tweeter on top of their speaker and go, there's more air. Between your ears. But, so, yeah, having a yellow pixel, where exactly is it getting its information from? I'm not saying that there isn't the possibility that it adds a quadrillion more shades, but if you're only getting red, green, and blue coming off the frickin' disc, what's the yellow coming from? Where is that yellow information coming from? And if it's coming from some sort of processing by Sharp, do you really want that? Go on, Rob.
Right. Yeah. So, first of all, mathematically speaking, he shortchanged himself, because if these are all 8-bit versions of colors, meaning there are 256 shades of each individual color. So there's 256 shades of red, green, blue, and in this case yellow. So to figure out the total number of possible combinations of all four, that's 256 to the power of 4. Normally it would just be red, green, and blue, 256 to the power of 3. So 256 to the power of 3 is about 16.7 million. You've heard of 8-bit color equaling about 16.7 million shades of color, and that's what it is mathematically. By having that fourth subpixel in there, you just went to like over 4 billion. Over 4 billion shades, because you multiplied 16.7 million by 256. So he shortchanged himself saying it was only a billion more shades. Yeah, he could have exaggerated even more. But in effect, it does nothing. The best it could do, the very, very best it could do, is they would have really good processing that would use that yellow subpixel, and it would look exactly the same as if they had just used accurate red, green, and blue. That is the best it could possibly do. The more likely thing is that it would throw it off a little bit. But more than that, the Wikipedia article pointed out a very good thing, which is that the backlights that we're using now, whether they're a fluorescent backlight or in the case of most projectors, that an HPF lamp. Is that what it is? HPF? Whatever it is. I can't remember the UHF. Yeah, ultra.
UHF doesn't
Oh,
sound right.
UHP. I knew there was a P in there somewhere. Ultra high pressure is what it used to stand for.
UHF,
I got there eventually. It's warm in my room.
All right,
My
go
brain is addled. But anyway, the lights that we're using, the backlights themselves, it's not like they give off a truly white light, as in every single frequency of light is being emitted by the backlight. They're actually giving off like spikes of red, green, and blue in the actual backlight itself. There's no spike at yellow. So there is no yellow light from the backlight for the yellow pixel to allow through, while no other subpixel allows through that yellow backlight.
I would like to know if anybody's actually seen this pixel. I mean, do we know this pixel actually exists?
Oh, yeah.
Did they just say?
I have a Quatron display. I mean, I got it because of the size, not because it was Quatron. I have a Quatron display. If I get my face right up there, I can actually see the subpixels in there. They're tiny little strips, tiny little vertical strips in the thing. And there's a yellow one. Yay. But I mean, all the yellow one is doing is allowing through the combination of red and green light. Red and green combined make yellow. That's where it comes from. So the red and green subpixels were already allowing through that light. So that's where the yellow is coming from. So yeah, I mean, it's. I guess theoretically you can make the display brighter because I mean it can allow a little bit more light through, but you had to divide up the pixel into 4 subsections instead of 3, so you made it smaller in effect. It's a pure gimmick thing that Sharp did, and the best they could do would be to process it enough that it doesn't screw up. So yeah. Anyway.
That's what I say about same thing with high-end speaker cables. Best case scenario is that they work as good as the cheap stuff.
That's right.
So, best case scenario is it works as good as the RBG stuff. So there you go. And Gary would like to ask a hypothetical. Now that Dolby Atmos has been fully announced, if Oro 3D were also available, and if content, a lot of ifs in this, and if content were available for both formats, which one do we think would sound better? What are the differences? And if we were starting with an empty room, what system would we choose to follow and build?
Can I do the differences?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so first the similarities. They both start with a regular 5.1 setup. That's the same between them. You still have left, center, right, and 2 surrounds. Oro 3D is a little bit different. What it does is 30 degrees above. So go take your regular speakers where they are at ear height, and then go 30 degrees vertically above that. They put a speaker above each of those 5 regular speakers in their full-blown system. So there's actually a left, center, right, and 2 surround heights that are 30 degrees above the ones you already have. And then they'd have one more speaker directly above you that they call their voice of God speaker. And so you end up with 11 speakers in that setup. And they are all based on channels. They actually have to have information in the soundtrack itself. The mixer of that soundtrack has to say, this sound is going into this particular channel. It's going to be played by this particular speaker. And that's the way it's set up. Now, for the home setup that Oro 3D has been proposing, they're saying, all right, forget the voice of God speaker that's directly above you and forget the height center speaker. We're just going to go down to quad heights that are supposed to be 30 degrees above your left and right front speakers and your 2 surround speakers. That's the setup, and it has to be in the mix. It has to be in the actual soundtrack itself. Someone has to place the sounds into each speaker that they want it to come out of. So that's Oro 3D. Atmos takes your regular 5 speakers and then puts, in the home version, 4 speakers overhead. So kind of like 2 rows of 2. They more or less line up to your left and right with where your front left and right speakers are, and then one of them's up and a little bit ahead of you, and one of them's up and a little bit behind you. So it doesn't have those 30-degree heights. It just has speakers overhead. That's the only addition that it's making in the home version. So the big difference there is the soundtrack itself. In the soundtrack, so the mixer doesn't have to go in there and say, here's the sound that's going to come out of the front right ceiling speaker. They don't do that. Instead, they get a sound object. So they just pick this sound and they literally drag it with a mouse pointer in sort of like a 3D landscape that's printed out on their computer screen, and they say, here's where I want the sound to come from. They just drag it over there. And then Dolby Atmos applies XYZ coordinates to that sound. And now it's up to the processor on the home side to take those XYZ coordinates and say, all right, if I'm going to make a sound come from those XYZ coordinates, what combination of speakers that I have available to me do I have to use? So it's not channel-based. It can actually adapt. If you had more speakers on the ceiling, it could get more precise with those XYZ coordinates. So those are the differences between the two systems.
I like the speaker placements of the Oro 3D more than I like the speaker placements of the Dolby Atmos.
Mm-hmm.
But I like basically everything else about Atmos better than I like Oro 3D. Which is good because Oro 3D is dead, and there's no way that that's going to be a thing that you're going to have to worry about, Gary, because Atmos is essentially here. It's in everything, and best case scenario for Oro 3D is it becomes like it becomes like not DTS. It becomes like that Circus Surround or whatever. Remember that? It was only like in Harman products or something. You know,
or it's
Cirrus
kind of like
Surround.
SACD. You know, it has to be like its own separate format, basically, right? Like the thing is, taking this out of the hypothetical round, I mean, Gary's saying, all right, if all things were equal, would we choose one over the other? But the problem is they aren't equal. They aren't equal at all. Atmos is here. There's already releases coming on Blu-ray. There is nothing even close like that for Oro 3D. Now, Oro 3D does have their own content, right? You can download their content, and then you have to have their special processor to play it back. But they're not even close to being in, consumer-level AV receivers. They're not going to be on Blu-ray discs anytime soon. And, I mean, just look at the number of theaters out in the world, full-size commercial movie theaters. Like, the Atmos theaters way outnumber the Oro 3D theaters. So there's no incentive for the consumer electronics industry to look at that and go, oh yeah, we got to start supporting Oro 3D in addition to Atmos. Like, it's done, man. Put a fork in it. It's done.
Yeah. I like rooting for the little guys, so maybe maybe they'll come back, but I doubt it. I don't really see it.
I will say honestly, if it comes down to surround music, I think I would prefer the Oro 3D setup for music. I think I would prefer the Atmos setup for movies, because in music, you're not going to have objects panning around you. You don't need like a special sound effect to be in a particular location in 3D space for music. What you could do is set up 9 or 11 microphones in the listening space for the music and have the musicians in there playing, and it would capture all of that nice height information, reflection information, so that you could get a really good sense of ambience. It would really transport you to the location where the recording was made. I like that idea, and they talk about that over at Oro, using it for music. And in that sense, I think it does kind of make sense, and they could deliver it as a download. It doesn't have to be on a disc. You just have to have their special processor. But to me, that's the use case for Oro.
You still should be able to do that with Atmos, though. You should still be able to do that same thing with Atmos.
Yeah, I guess you could set up the microphones, and then that would just become your XYZ coordinate for that object. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. There's no reason why. Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah,
I do. The thing is I think ceiling speakers are completely lame. I just think that that's an awful idea that you'll never sell anybody on. You can maybe sell. Now, the idea of bouncing stuff off the ceiling, okay, yeah, that's something that people will get behind. But obviously, Bose. But the surround heights and stuff, it's I mean the ceiling stuff, just installing speakers in your ceiling, I just don't see it. I don't see it as something that's going to really. And I would love to be proven wrong. I would love to go and listen to an Atmos home theater setup and go, wow, that really made a big difference in here. But I think I'm just going to go,
yeah. If Atmos is going to sell to a larger consumer base than just fanatics like the people who listen to this podcast, if it's actually going to become a mass market thing, it's going to be on those reflecting speakers.
Oh, for sure.
There is no way the average consumer is going to be putting speakers in their ceiling specifically for this purpose.
No, the only thing they might be doing, though, is those people who have who bought homes that had
That's right.
in-ceiling crap
already in there.
stuff already in there. They go, oh, I can finally use those speakers again.
They're
Uh,
probably not going to go to the trouble of running the wires necessary to get it to their new Atmos receiver. Like, I honestly think that Onkyo, with their Atmos-enabled home theater in a boxes, are on the right track. Like
yeah.
that's the way. If it's ever going to happen, it has to be affordable, not look any different than what you already have, and people basically get it by accident. Like that's how
I
Atmos is
want
going to
somebody
succeed.
to sell me on ceiling speakers. That's what I want.
Hmm.
I want on ceiling speakers. You know, and honestly, how good do you think those Atmos speakers actually have to be? Surely they can be complete garbage, right? So, a single driver, full range ish.
Hmm.
I mean,
Well, I
there's
mean,
got to
it
be,
has to be higher frequencies only. Those are the only
yeah,
ones that are directional enough to bounce off the ceiling.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah.
All right. Last week I talked a little bit about the fact that I had installed my daylight screen, which has not fallen down, which means I did it right.
Yay.
And I was like, oh, I lost the remote. People are like, oh, well, can't you just get a Harmony? And I had considered that, but I was still holding out hope that I would uh, find the remote. I didn't find the remote, so I contacted Harmony, so I'm going to get a Harmony Ultimate. So that's on the way. That's a thing that's happening. So, and
Congratulations.
thank you. I confirmed that they do in fact control daylight screens. I keep looking up at it like it's going to fall out of the ceiling. I haven't really checked it.
Well, hey, just put four speakers up there and you can really be looking around the whole time.
I don't doubt.
Are they going to fall? Are they going to fall?
Well, those things, I figure those things just Velcro up there. They're going to be light little things, right? Battery
Oh,
powered.
dear.
So that's going to be something. We're going to be talking a little bit more about the Ultimate when I get it. And those of you that have Harmony remotes and end up having questions about them, this will be the podcast for you because I'll finally have some experience with programming one. Let's
Oh,
see.
look forward to that, buddy.
Once again, we got to thank Abel for helping us out and supporting the podcast. You can come to the website, avrant.com, and comment or leave us a note or donate to the podcast to help support the podcast. A coffee little button there. Facebook.com/avrantpodcast, all one word. Rob's at rob@avrant or at First Reflect for Twitter. My email, of course, is tom@avrant.com, and my Twitter is at avrant_Tom. Did we go 2 hours again? Dang
Hmm.
it. Just about. All right. For AV Rant, I'm Tom Mandrick.
And I'm Rob H. Now go out and listen to something.
Guys, we'll start the hangout in a little bit. I'm having a bit of a heartburn issue, so it might take a second.